What is up, Chicago Bears fans? Welcome to the Bears Huddle podcast with me, your host, Owen James, bringing you your UK take on our Chicago Bears, guys, as we head towards rookie minicamp, and then the OTAs, and then training camp, and then preseason, and finally the season. But you know what? There's still a long way to go. There's still a long way to go. There are still lots of decisions to be made. There are still maybe even some trades to be made, cuts to be made, lots of things to happen between now and the season opener. But look, one of the things that's kind of now becoming a bit of a, I know I've heard people talking about this, is the future of Ryan Poles. Now, Ryan Poles is obviously due a new contract very soon. It seems very much that the intention of the Bears ownership is to give Ryan Poles that new contract. However, I think, we look at this point, at no point, am I saying that he's not the man to take the Bears forward as the GM, that he's not a good GM, that he needs to be set. I'm not saying any of that for a minute. But what I am saying is, I think, in terms of what we've done this offseason, I think Ryan Poles has, no matter what your view on Ryan Poles is, he has done a good job this offseason in terms of starting to assemble not only a good roster that can hopefully win us some games. I'm not talking necessarily about winning, even winning the division at this point. I'm talking about playoff action, at least getting to the playoffs this year. I'm not talking about winning a Super Bowl. I'm talking about at least getting to a playoff position this season, because I'll be honest with you, fed up of losing season after losing season. And given the amount we've put into this off-season, we don't want to be in a position where we are picking in the top 10, or the top 12, or even the top 16 next season. We want to be one of those successful teams. And Ryan Poles has, I think, done what he can to build a roster. He has obviously gone and very, very much majorly up-leveled the offensive line. Obviously the left tackle position could change. It could be Ozzy Trapilo. It could be Darnell Wright. We don't know. It could be Kieran Amagaji. But, we've obviously replaced Tevin Jenkins, for example. We've brought in Joe Tooney. We've brought in Drew Dolman. We've brought in Jonah Jackson. There's been quality added to that interior offensive line. So, that line has been put into position where hopefully, Caleb will not spend a lot of time on his back, and he will have the opportunity to actually, stand pass the ball and show us what a good quarterback he is. And also, the fact we can hopefully get this running game going behind a very good offensive line. And often you find that even an average running back can look good behind a good offensive line. And I think that is kind of what he's hoped. But not only that, he's given us a core of attacking talent there that can hopefully, become a fantastic set of weapons for Caleb as well. And we sort of mentioned Caleb in a minute. There's Roma Dunze, there's DJ Moore, as long as the guy stops pouting this season. There's obviously the new guy, Luther Burden. There's Zacchaeus, there's Colston Loveland, there's Cole Kmet, Dondre Swift, Carmen Ongai. There is talent there, real talent there. And he's done a very good job in terms of assembling that. And he's kind of been given that free rein, I think, to go and, first of all, get the head coach. Obviously now we have one of the best young offensive minded head coaches, in the NFL, in Ben Johnson. This is a guy whose Detroit Lions offense was free scoring, producing, I think it was 70 touchdowns last season. Innovative offensive mind, and if you kind of look at the Bears over the last few seasons, the offense has been absolutely dreadful. Whether that was obviously Shane Waldron's fault or whoever's fault, it has been dreadful. Ryan Poles has put a lot into bringing Johnson on board, and giving Ben Johnson a little bit of freedom, I think, to kind of help to build this roster and help to build a team that is going to be a threat next season. And, Ben Johnson's talked very much about, this is not a 5-year project. This is a 5-month project. This is about getting it right for the start of the season in September, isn't it? And, Poles has obviously, he kind of has linked his future really to Ben Johnson and to Caleb Williams to some extent as well. Caleb Williams, obviously round 1 pick last year. So first pick in the first round last year. Obviously, Jaden Daniels had a better season last season, but, it was always going to be Caleb Williams. And I think, there's a lot on Caleb. And I think, a lot, going forward in terms of Ryan Poles' future depends on what happens with Ben Johnson and what happens with Caleb Williams. Caleb, look, has undoubtedly got the talent. He has undoubtedly got the skills. He has undoubtedly got the ability to be an absolute superstar quarterback in the National Football League because of what he showed in college. But how many times have we seen college quarterbacks who have all the skills, all the talent, all the arm strength and arm intelligence and all the ability in the world, not then translate that to the NFL a number of times. But, you know, we've got to have faith that Caleb can do it this year. I mean, we've given him, I honestly believe, and Ryan Poles has given him what he needs. You know, he's got now an offensive line that will protect him and he will not get sacked 60 times next season. You know, he's got a effective core of attacking talent to throw the ball to in Colston Loveland, in Cole Kmet, in Roma Dunze, in DJ Moore, and in, obviously, as well, adding into that Luther Burden III. You know, running game, yeah, I think, you know, whatever you think of Dondre Swift, you know, I think putting behind that offensive line, hopefully, you know, it gets better. And look, there's still time. There's still time for Ryan Poles to bring in someone else, whether that be a Jamal Williams, who had his one fantastic season with the Detroit Lions under Ben Johnson, over 1,000 yards, double-digit TDs under Ben Johnson. Or whether that be a Gus Edwards or a Nick Chubb or a J.K. Dobbins. Apparently the Bears are interested in J.K. Dobbins. You know, look, I think he's given Caleb every opportunity to succeed and do his best. He's given him a coaching staff that are more offensively minded. He's obviously brought in Ben Johnson. He's got Press Taylor. He's got Declan Doyle. He's got, obviously, the JT Barrett, the QB coach. So he's given him everything he needs, a mentor in Case Keenum. There is no excuses this season. You know, Caleb has to produce. And if Caleb doesn't produce, then, you know, questions not only have to be asked of Caleb and his future, but also Ryan Poles, because, you know, I think if Caleb fails, it sets this franchise back years. It really does. You know, we don't want to be going into next year's draft trying to find a quarterback, you know, or trying to trade for one, because arguably there's not a lot out there. There's not a lot out there because realistically, you look at the best QBs in the league and you aren't going to be able to trade for those guys. The Josh Allens, the Jalen Hurts, the Patrick Mahomes, the Josh Allens, you know, those type of players, you know, they're just not up there to be traded. So, look, at the end of the day, a lot of how and what happens with this man's future depends on how Ben Johnson goes and how Caleb Williams goes. And I think, you know, Ryan will be desperate for these guys to work out, as we all are. You know, look, I don't think any of us, you know, no true fan is going to sit there and say they want to see one of them fail so we can get rid of Poles because people don't like Ryan Poles. I personally think he's done a decent job. I'm not saying he's one of the best GMs in the league. I think he's a good, solid GM. I think he has his weaknesses, he has his issues, he has his problems. He makes some bad picks. Ruben Hippolyte, for example. But look, I think, you know, what GM's perfect? That's the kind of question there. But I think, you know, like I said, a lot depends in terms of his future. I think he'll still get a new contract, don't get me wrong, but I think in terms of his long-term future, it does kind of rest on how Ben Johnson goes and how Caleb Williams goes. If we're sat in a position 12 months from now where Caleb's failed, Ben Johnson's failed, we've had another losing season, we're picking inside the top 10 again, then you're going to have to start asking severe questions of this man because, you know, he will be obviously, he's making these appointments, he's making these picks, and if they're not playing out, if they're not working out, you know, then you've got to start to ask those questions. But, you know, you've got to have faith, I believe, that this is the right time. This is the time that we can kick on, that we can become a successful team again, that we can start to get at least a winning season. And I want to see wins. I don't want to see any more hard luck stories. I don't want to see any more, it came to the final play and it all went wrong on the final play. Washington Commanders, Green Bay at home, etc., etc. Don't want to see that anymore. No more excuses. Go out there and win. That's what they've got to do now. And like I said, I think a lot of people's futures depend on what happens next season. Guys, I'd love to know your thoughts. Please drop me a comment down below. And if you've enjoyed the content, please like, comment, share and subscribe to the channel as we aim to grow our fan community together to bring the Bears across the pond with these Bears on this side of the pond. Guys, thanks for watching. Bear down, Chicago. Catch you later.